Hi guys, for today's card we're going to use some old school products. I've got some masks here from Tim Holtz from ages ago, and I'm actually going to use some old packaging from an embossing folder. This is an embossing folder from the October card kit from Simons and Stamp, and I'm actually going to use part of that backing and the sort of window piece as a shaker window. So you can use your old packaging to make shaker cards or other things, I'm sure. So I have a piece of Windsor & Newton watercolor paper, but any watercolor paper or water reactive paper or cardstock will work. And I'm using some Stormy Sky Oxide ink to just get a light blend on here. I don't need it to be super blended, which you will see. And it's just to get a sort of base color for the top half, or sort of 2/3 of the piece of cardstock. And this piece measures about 5 by 7. I kind of used the plastic windowy bit and the cardstock that was in the back of that as a bit of a guide to like work out the size that I needed. So that's how I came up with that size, but it is about 5 by 7. And you could use this watercolor piece, you could actually do this and not put it into a shaker window at all, and just have it as a nice background as a card base, as a card front, or even as a bit of decoration at Christmas time if you've put it in a frame or something like that. So the masks, like I say, I've had these for many, many years. They were the seasonal, I think they were just called seasonal masks that Tim Holtz brought out many years ago, and I have cut them all apart. They came on like one sheet with like some Valentine's, some Halloween and some Christmas stuff, and it's got like a temporary adhesive at the back of it, which, to be fair, my ink was still wet because oxides are notorious for staying wet for longer, which is one of the cool things about them. So in the end, as a temporary thing, it should have sort of temporarily held, but they are many years old for one, and you know, it is going on to an inked background which is still wet. So I did try and dry it off a bit, but in the end I just held on to the mask and it was fine. It stuck enough, but I got a little inky doing this, but that's half the fun, I think. So I'm using some prize ribbon, which is a new colour that I got for my birthday. So thanks, hubby. And I'm going to use that around the sort of Santa and the sleigh and the reindeer. And then I'm going to bring in some chipped sapphire, which is just a darker blue. I didn't really want to bring any black soot into it, although you could if you wanted just an extra layer. But the sort of 3 shades of blue for me were enough to give that sort of nighttime sky type of look. So I'm just using the chipped sapphire all the way around the edges, and again not going all the way down the card either, because the bottom bit's going to be something different. So you'll see that in a bit. And very easy blending, like there's no rhyme or reason. Let's face it, a night sky or even a daytime sky, the shades are like blues and whatever the color is of the sky at the time is not going to be perfectly blended as such, if that makes sense. So you're going to have some variation in the coloring. So I kind of figure, why not? And also if there's clouds out there, then that also adds to the whole, you know, night sky kind of look, especially a wintry sky. You might have some cloud cover. So a bit of clean up on the mask, very easy to clean because it's a mask. So it's just like a piece of plastic that with a temporary adhesive at the back. And then there's the Santa and the reindeer, and I think it turns out really nice because it's just a little, like, it's got a hint of the blue in the background, so it kind of works with the sky, but he's sort of like, he's right there, if that makes any sense. Anyway, so now I'm going to take some peeled paint and some forest moss oxides, and I'm using this stencil can't remember what number stencil set. This is one of the minis, and it is a Christmassy themed set of the like 3 mini stencils that you get together. I will have all the details below for you, of course, as always. But I'm just kind of using the sort of top portion of the tree of the largest one, and I'm just creating this sort of skyline, if you like, of where he would be flying over the top of the tree line, or at least that's the idea in my head. So it kind of works, but sort of, kind of, maybe a little bit. So like I say, you can do this not just for you know, as a shaker card, because that's obviously what we'll make. Well, I'm actually not making a card today, but I'll explain more later. So you could easily just leave that, you know, use it as a card front, like I say, or, you know, you could still use this just as a piece of decoration. But I also wanted to add the, like, more trees to it. So I'm going to use the same stencil, but I'm going to use one of the small trees, or the small tree, I should say, to give like a different bit of texture and in a darker color. So it's just, again, it's just more layers on layers. Now bear in mind, again, these are oxides, so they are wet and they are going to be wet for a while. So I'm winging it, but I'm just using these and just going with it. Now this is kind of funny because I didn't realize I couldn't get there's like a layer that goes on top of the base of the tree, right, for each of the small and the large tree. But what I didn't realize, I actually have this back to front. So I'm actually using the back side of this, not on purpose, I might add. It was only when I cleaned it up that I realized I actually had it back to front. But I thought, well, it still worked. So just that would explain why the layer that is there for the trees didn't actually line up as well as it would have done if I'd actually had it the right way around. But anyway, so I'm using some forest moss now to give like a different shade of green, and it's kind of, because it's slightly darker, it kind of works. It sort of went over the colour of the peeled paint, but actually in the end it's quite nice because it gets this sort of layered, and like there's lots of different layers of trees, if that makes sense. So it worked out really nicely in the end. So this is where I realised I used the wrong side, but yeah, it's fine. So and then on this one, I actually went too far up, so I just kind of made it work because I basically had this, like the I need to say the stalk, the trunk of the tree sticking up, and I didn't want that because it's supposed to look like the top edge of the trees. So then of course I spritzed it with some water, of course. And as all distress things, they will always react with water. So oxides are no different. Oxides just have this combination of like pigment and dye, and they have this sort of oxidization look that kind of goes on, and that's the whole point behind them. So that's also another reason why I used some watercolor paper. I thought it's a sturdier paper, but it also means I can do this sort of stuff with it and add water and spritz and, you know, really play around with it. So now I'm going to take a powder tool, which I know seems a bit weird to do, but you'll see in a second what I'm going to do. And I am going to do another video on this, giving a bit more detail on how to do this. But I'm actually going to use a stencil. Now this is a Stampin' Up stencil, again from a few years ago. I've had this thing for years, and I've got like it's actually a makeup sponge thing, one of those egg shaped ones. I don't know what they're called. I don't really wear makeup, so I wouldn't know, but it makes a great tool for sponging ink on. So I decided to take some milled lavender just for a little bit of like a hint of color, but nothing that's gonna too badly contrast. I could have used white, like a white pigment ink, and that would have worked too, but I actually quite like this, very subtle. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to heat emboss all these dots. Now they are random, but they don't look to me like a proper snowfall, but it was what I had, so I used it. So use what you have, and don't stress about it. So So I took the stencil, and then obviously the stencil is not wide enough for the panel that I have. So I just kind of eyeballed it and went with it. Again, don't stress about this stuff too much. It's still going to look really cool. And actually I'm quite chuffed with how this turned out, and you'll see as we go. So this is now my camera cut out, unfortunately, but I used some of this Snowdrop Pearl Cosmic Shimmer embossing powder, and I just dumped it on there, and now I'm going to heat set it. But obviously my camera died when I showed you how to do that, but I think mostly people will know how to heat emboss. But if you don't, I have videos on it, and I also have the next one after this will show you that in more detail of how to emboss with your stencils. So I'm just heat embossing these pearly, slightly pinky snowflakes. It just adds something, and it's a little bit of contrast on the background, but it's not like an obvious white snowdrop, if that makes sense. Snowdrop? Snowflake. So and it's just there, it's just a subtle something in the background, and again it's another layer. So that's the key thing for me for things like this, is layers and layers and layers. The other thing I could have done is not embossed over the top of Santa, but for me in my head, and the trees, but in my head I'm thinking, well, snow falls on top of things, so it makes sense that there's snow over the top of him. That's just my brain. So now the fun part. So the reason I left, there's like almost like a lip around the edge of the plastic part, which I left on for good reason, because we're going to use that to help stick the, I guess, the little plastic pot, if you like, or window, to the card base, or the, you know, the main panel. But first I'm going to use the piece of like backing. I'm going to actually use that to help support the watercolor cardstock. The watercolor cardstock would have, and did, it tends to warp because we've played around with water, we've played around with ink, we've heat embossed it, so it tends to warp when you do all those things to it. So I just added some fairly strong adhesive to the card, but this is card on card, so this bit should be okay. On the next bit I do use some lawn fawn tape, which is quite a bit stronger than this tape that I'm using here, and I will use that around the edges to stick it to the background to make the shaker card, I keep calling it a card, it's not a card, but to make the shaker window. So just getting this piece on the back. You could use a plain white piece of cardstock, it's fine. I just thought, waste not, want not. I landed up throwing away, right at the beginning you would have seen just a few bits of the plastic and a few, you know, one little piece of the cardboard. So for me, it's a good use of some waste, so it doesn't land up, you know, not all of it anyway, on a landfill somewhere. That's just my thought. But also it makes a nice little decoration at Christmas or whatever you're using it for. So I've got some alcohol here. This is just isopropyl alcohol, and I'm actually using it on a paper towel just to clean up the plastic. It does two things. One, it cleans it, so it's ready for your, you know, so it looks nice. And two, by cleaning it, it also helps things to stick to it. And if you use like an alcohol, it would just evaporate quite quickly. So it cleans it and it evaporates. So there's no waiting time, basically. I'm kind of impatient with stuff like that. So, and at this point I realized that it was maybe a little too wide. So I'm just trying to trim it down as much as I can. In hindsight, I should have just left it because of what I do at the end to hide the tape. Even though it's clear tape. Yeah, I didn't need to do any of that. But nonetheless, I did. So now I'm going to take where the lips of the this plastic is, I'm going to add some tape to this. Now, if you use a wet adhesive, which is pretty much always, depending on the adhesive though, I suppose, it's going to be the strongest thing. It's going to be the thing that sticks the most and will last the longest. You have to be a little careful because obviously if you get any of that on the plastic, it will look quite messy. So a tape or like a dry adhesive is going to be, I think, a better option, but you need fairly strong tape for this. So I've put that along the edge that's going to sit on the card, so on the decorated piece. And then because that lip is flat to the main card piece, I will then stick some more tape on top of it once it's stuck down, and you'll see what we'll do there, but we'll get to that. So now I've got my tape ready. I'm going to start filling this window, and it's kind of a big window. Two things though. One, it's a big window, so yes, you need quite a bit of shaker stuff. So I've got Lucy's little things, little stars in it. I've got sequins that I've had for donkey's years. I thought, why not use it? I've got beads in there, and I wanted this to look kind of like snow. So I've got more silvers and this sort of mother of pearl and white sort of color tones in there. You could have any color tone you want, of course, but I went with that because I was thinking snowfall. The problem, and you'll see this, is that by putting that in there, and by putting as much as I did in there, a lot of it falls to the bottom when it's sort of, if you like, stood up. So it means that the trees kind of get covered a bit. So just bear that in mind when you're doing something like this. Also, the little stars kind of get stuck to the adhesive on the inside because I guess the shape of this, because it is packaging, it's not actually meant for shakers, although we're using it for this. It's I guess got a slightly rounded edge so that they kind of get caught underneath that, but it still looks cute, and in the end I do really quite like it. So I've stuck and hoped that to the main art, if you like, and then used a bone folder just to burnish it so that we can get it to stick as much as possible. Again, I did that because we've got watercolor paper, we've got ink on there, we've got embossing powder. That's why you need a pretty strong tape to get it to stick. But for the most part, I think it's doing okay so far. So lots and lots of shakety things going on in there. But like I say, some of it gets stuck to the top there. I'm not going to worry too much. At the end of the day, this is just a cool thing to have, out at Christmas time. And then I have these two glittery washi tape things. I've had them for years. They were, in fact, I think I won them at a Stampin' Up, like craft day thing that I went to with my upline. I call her my upline. I'm not a demo, but always, if I go to anybody to buy, I buy from her. And so I decided to stick that around the edge just to kind of finish that edge off, because although I kind of like it without anything around the edge, it being plastic is kind of sharp on that edge, and it doesn't feel like it's finished. So I thought, well, it's Christmas, you can't have enough sparkle at Christmas. So I decided to add some extra tape along that edge, like I'm doing here. Again, I'm going to burnish that on there as much as possible. And the reason I'm doing this, even though it's washi tape, and it has some stick to it, it's not sticky enough. And I don't know if it's just because it's so old now that it's losing its stick, or if it's just that it never was going to be like that, or because it's like washi tape, so it's not going to be super sticky anyway. So I thought the extra adhesive would help. To be honest, it's already come undone a bit, so I'm going to have to use some wet adhesive very carefully, because like I say, if you get wet adhesive all over like a plastic window sort of thing, it ain't going to look pretty. So I think I might have to do something though, because it has lifted a little bit, just on a couple of the edges. But I just thought it would finish it off. So you can use any tape here. You can use whatever you've got to decorate that edge. You could even use, again, very carefully, if you use some wet adhesive, you could use that around the edges and then add like twine and sort of sit it and glue it to that edge. Have a couple of rows of twine, if you know what I mean. And then that way it'll give it that sort of rusticy kind of look, as opposed to a super sparkly one. So there's lots of things you can do, but I think it needed that finishing edge. So that's why I did what I did. So just getting some more on the edge here. Honestly, I winged this because I haven't done this sort of thing for so long. It does take me back to my childhood a bit, where I'm like, almost like wrapping out. Do you remember wrapping your school books? Like, I used to love that. I was such a nerd. I used to love doing that and wrapping them up in like brown paper or, you know, whatever wrapping paper we had. And then there was a certain way you had to wrap the corners, and so that you got this nice neat edge. So I was trying to remember how to do that, and I totally didn't do that here, but just it took me back to that sort of bit old school stuff. So wrapping it round, I've got some extra tape on the back as well for the for these longer sides, just again because I thought it might hold it better, but like I say, I'm gonna have to go back in with a bit of wet glue, but that's fine. And again, burnishing it just to try and help hold it in place. And then I took the teeny tiny little Tim Holtz scissors and just knocked those corners out so you can't see those edges where it folded it over. Very easy to do, but yeah, kind of winging it at this point. So I would, at this point, I would put something solid on the back. Oh, I forgot about this. I'm using one of the little sentiment strips from last year, so 2020 Christmas release from Tim Holtz. And there's like a billion of these different sort of types of like sticker label things. And I like the one that said, and it made sense, a visit from Santa. So I thought, why not? So on the back, I'm just showing you that you could put that, you could either put a piece of solid cardstock on the back, and then you could also put something on the back to hang it. So you could either have it standing up somewhere, or you could hang it on the wall at Christmas. Or if you found someone really special, you can put this on the front of a card. So yeah. So I hope you've enjoyed this, guys, and I hope that you find some old packaging and do something creative with it. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.